Hi, I'm Terence Samuel, and welcome to our webinar on how technology is reshaping the American childhood. American kids today are in a world that is full of opportunity and in some ways full of risk. And a lot of that has to do with technology. Today, we are going to talk about how technology and childhood collide and how we as a country, as a community, as a society, figure out how to deal with this going forward. Because it is full of risk, but it is also full of opportunity. I have said that I think what we would like as an organization at Connect and Protect is to have the internet be a place where kids can be kids for as long as possible, which is not so different from what we would like their lives to be offline. Today, I have two amazing guests, Christopher Koopman, who is the CEO of the Abundance Institute and the father of 7 kids. So you're not just getting tech expertise, you're getting parenting expertise. And Dr. Carmalita Seitz, who is the managing director at ISTE and ASCD, and we will tell you what those initials stand for at some point during this conversation today, who is also an innovator and expert on educational technology, and in the parent department, the mother of 4. Thank you both so much for being with me today.
You're welcome. It's great being here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, let's just jump in. To the audience, I thank you for joining us. The one thing I am asked to remind you of is to, when we get to the Q&A, to please do it in the Q&A chat, not the team chat, or not the group chat. All right, let's just jump right in. So we've been talking a lot, Dr. Seitz, about kind of the threat of technology, and there is this sense of crisis around it, and the public conversation is so much about what we need to fix and how we need to protect kids. From what you've seen working with educators, working in the classroom, what is it, where are we in terms of technology and the evolution, and how scared do we need to be about what's happening in the world right now?
Ooh, that's a loaded question. You gave me the big one right out the gate. See, Christopher, where are we? One, there's a lot happening all at once, right? And so that immediately can cause some fear and some resistance to the change. And I know we were talking earlier, and I want to bring this up because I think this is important, is one of the most important things to support our children, our own children, but also support the children in schools as educators, is to embrace the change, to play with it, to see where it's going. I know, Christopher, I'd love to bring you in here because you said something important about pens and notebooks and all of that when we were talking. But so just like we're all here right now, we're all here on a live chat and podcast. My job all day long is being on technology. So that's where our jobs are going. That's where the job market is for our children. So whether they're a year old, happy birthday, or they're 13, 14 years old, they're going to be moving into this area, whether it's higher ed or job roles. And so where we are right now, I think, is at a really critical point in education with educational technology. Specifically, and I'll give an example. For any of you who are Gen X, I'm a Gen Xer. I'm a proud Gen Xer. We remember when technology was coming into the classrooms. We remember when dial-up was happening. I don't know if anyone remembers the sound. The sound is embedded in my head to dial up. That was a big change, and whether we embraced it then fully or over a period of time, it really has transformed what we've done in education. think in the world of AI right now and technology and having cell phones, and young children have access to a computer in their hand almost every single day, we're at that precipice again of how are we going to move forward with the lessons we've learned when ed tech started coming into the classrooms. I think
that's a good point. And I want to bring Chris in here. And the reference there is to Chris's youngest child just having turned 1. So yes, happy birthday to the baby of the group. So I think there is a clear understanding that technology kind of represents this unbelievable opportunity, but the discussion around it is kind of like clouded by crisis, and like I said, and there's this rush to like protect kids online, and there are these new laws, and you know, the anxiety around AI and social media is it feels in the public space anyway that it's kind of driven by a kind of anxiety that is hard to describe. Chris, you have a different view on how to approach this, and I don't know if we said this before, but you have 7 kids, so it's not an abstract question for you.
Yeah. It's quite interesting because, you know, what I do in my professional life matters a lot for what I do as a parent. And you're right. I think the thing to think about is a couple of things. One, as you both have noted, there's this rapid pace of change that's occurring, and the pace is only increasing, not decreasing. So you're seeing not just new technology, but the technology that's being introduced is rapidly evolving and changing in real time. And that is creating some panic. I think from a policy side, we always seem to be sort of fighting the last battle during the current frame. And so a lot of what we're experiencing in the conversations around technology and kids and the internet in particular is an effort to correct for seeming mistakes made 10 or 15 years ago with the advent of social media. Now, obviously, you know, parents should be vigilant in what their kids are consuming and how they're consuming it online. There's quite a bit of freedom for the last 25, 30 years on the internet. And I think a lot of people are beginning to think that was a mistake. The question for me, and what you allude to, Terry, is sort of my approach is, I think, slightly different than what most people who operate in this space are approaching it with. And that's I am concerned about what my kids consume online. I'm very strict about the use. My wife and I are both very strict about the use of technology in our homes, but I am far more distrustful of the people who seem to think that they know better than me about what to do with my children than the technology itself. I think you look at a lot of the age verification regimes that have been pushed out, both at the state level and now, you know, it seems creeping back into the federal conversation. These are an effort to replace parental judgment with policy decisions by people who do not know me, do not know my children, are really not accountable to me in any sort of way, and have decided, sort of in short, that because mistakes have been made by some people in the past, we have all forfeited our right to be active parents in our kids' digital lives. And so I think my position on this is pretty straightforward. I should be making those decisions about what my kids consume and how they consume it. As you noted, I have 7 kids. My oldest is 10, and my youngest turns 1 this month in 3 weeks.
Every time you say that,
I know, I'm like, that is awesome. I'm going to clap.
It's crazy.
It's such a warming thing.
Yeah, and each one of them are different, right? And the decisions about what I make, the decisions I make about what they can do, each one of them can do with technology is very different. Even within our own home, there's no one size fits all for the Koopman family. And I think replacing parental decision-making and judgment does 2 things. One, it's going to be removing parents and replacing them with brittle policy infrastructure that will be broken as the continued pace of change continues. Right? Like, that's just clear. Like, things aren't slowing down. And the second thing is we're teaching our kids to be quite fragile online.
Yes.
Right? Like, we need to be building robust, like, children who can live in an increasing digital world, and removing them from these spaces altogether doesn't do them a service later in life. I think that, oftentimes, like anything, riding a bike, using a tool, and that's really what these devices or these apps or platforms are. They're tools. Teaching our kids responsible use of these tools at a young age in an environment in which they can fail in front of their parents and learn how to do better the next time is really important. And I think a lot of the debate right now is about either removing, it's all unfettered access, or no access at all. And I think my position is a little more nuanced than that.
Can I
go ahead.
Also, can I extend really, Chris? I fully agree with you, Christopher, on that. Being a parent and then being an educator for almost 30 years. My children are a little bit older than, well, nope, they're all around the same age, my group, but I'm getting into the point as a parent of modeling, right? Modeling good tech use, modeling the balance at home, because now, as my daughter's turning 14 years old, she has more access to social media legally than she did before that age. And so I'm looking at it, the modeling piece. So I agree with you fully when you're talking about, as a parent, I want to see that modeling in the education realm in her classrooms. And if we're looking at policies and changing, that's going to impact the time that it takes to model these really good practices in the classrooms, like I want to model it at home, when is that going to happen? And I would say, Christopher, you and I probably have a leg up being in the ed tech world, being in policy. I'm primarily in professional development for educators and leaders. If a parent is not, how is it that their children still can get that if we're making policies in the classrooms that are restricting? So I do agree.
Carmalita, can you talk about how working with basically the people who are kind of teaching or introducing this technology to students, meaning the teachers and the school systems, how has working with them shaped your thinking about how we ought to go forward? Because that moves us closer to the policy space, away from the parenting space, and the further you move in that direction, the more contentious and controversial it gets.
It does. So thank you for moving us that way. So I have been doing professional development and leading professional development most of my career. I was in the classroom before the dawn of really computers coming in, very little bit. And so I've been really focusing on that. And I would say this is a hard one. So this is a hard one, and I don't want anyone to judge how I'm going to say this the first way it's coming out, but professional development for educators has always been that grounding foundation to help them make change. And like Christopher was saying, right now, more so than ever, that needs to be very targeted and intentional. And just like you were saying, Christopher, children failing at home, I really want to see a culture in our school systems where teachers can be safe to fail using technology, because it doesn't always work. We always should have a plan B. And so I think, and this kind of crosses over into the policy, I'll give you an example. We have a DigCit coalition at ISTE, ASCD, where I work. And we come together with organizations and school districts to talk about digital citizenship, because AI literacy and digital citizenship, they're kind of one right there. And we were talking about this exact thing, and we were talking about policy. And one school system said, for the first time ever, they're really bringing teachers and students into the conversation around the policies they should be making, because that's who it affects. And it was the first time that I'm hearing, and they also said, it was specifically around AI, they said, instead of doing the more comfortable in schools of shutting everything down until we come up with a policy, and we know that days go by really quick, they decided to in a safe way, ensuring the safety of the students and their data, open it up and do more modeling and do more hearing best practices and what is going right and what is going wrong and how can we make this better, but hearing voices from students and educators. And I'm hoping that that's what's going to continue and kind of expand, is we shouldn't be in isolation of making policies for the educators who know good pedagogy in the classroom, or for the parents who are like, no, I want you to differentiate with technology, but in an authentic way. I think that was the first district, one of the first districts I heard do that, and I was really impressed.
Is that, so you just answered my question about.
I'm skipping ahead.
The fact that you're hearing this only now, is that a good sign that we're moving in the right direction, or is it concerning that we're moving too late?
I don't know if we're ever too late. I mean, any time to start is at least better than not starting at all. I would hope that we don't stop. I feel, and in my experience, my viewing, especially around ed tech, we tend to surge in the education field and then stall a little bit if something changes. I'm hoping that this is the time that we start and continue to have these conversations and not stall and feel comfortable like, oh, we've solved it, good. We've got a good policy for AI, we've got a good DigCit policy, and we're good. To really continue, this has to be a continuation. This has to be a long-term plan. This is not a let's talk, make a policy, and then move on. It should be revisited often. And by kind of like Christopher's 1-year-old who's now going to enter kindergarten, they're much different than my 27-year-old or my 14-year-old entering kindergarten. And so even the young voice is hearing where they are. And I'll give you one example, and I'll move over. As a parent, my 9-year-old said to me, this was a while ago, so maybe he was 8 at the time, and he was like, Mom, why do I have to go to school if I can get everything that I need to know on my laptop? Because he loves to research everything. And me as an educator is like, this is my moment in life to say why you need teachers. And I was explaining to him, and teachers and social, and you get to meet everybody. And he was like, no, okay. And he wasn't satisfied, but he left me for a moment. And then he asked me some crazy question, because he knew that I taught science. And he asked me some crazy question, and I'm like, I don't know, let's Google it. And he goes, oh, so teachers don't like Google. I was like, no, wait a second. No, I do know. But he already knew at 7 and 8 years old that he has this device to be able to access information when he wants to learn it.
And he knows how to win an argument too.
And he knows how to, I know, that's the part that gets me. But I think it's important that we realize children today and children coming up are way different than where we were in education when we started.
Chris, can I ask you to talk about your other job and your work on innovation and technology, and how that shapes your view of this conversation outside of, I imagine it feels different for you as a parent having this conversation in the tech world, and what needs to happen, and how fast we need to move, and which directions we need to move in.
Yeah, and I would say, some of this is like really integral to one another, right? So like my belief in sort of the right way to approach technology is really informed by my belief of how to parent and how to be involved in my kids' lives. And I think something that we really try hard to help people understand, it is okay to be afraid. Like, it's okay to look at things and be uncomfortable with the rapid pace of change, or be unsettled by the power of an AI technology. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. The question is sort of, how do you respond to that fear, and what do you do because of it? And I think there's a couple of things I would say here in the policy space is oftentimes, and I saw there was a question in the chat about the digital delusion. And there are a lot of books right now, Jared's being one of them, that bring some really striking statistics that can scare you about, Jonathan Haidt has some pretty striking statistics on this as well. about the impact of technology on kids, be it success in the classroom, be it mental health, be it social skills, et cetera. And one of the things is like really unpacking those statistics. You can find, this is just, correlation isn't always causation, and the correlation may run in reverse, right? There are striking statistics about the amount of screen time with students and success on standardized tests, for example. Now, the questions about standardized tests aside, what you might be finding is, the kids who are spending more time on their computers tend to be more disengaged, and they're finding an outlet for their disengagement on a screen rather than something else. And this isn't in the same way that, like, I find this coming. I have a kid who's a doodler, right? And there people are like, he's not paying attention. He's doodling. He's just filling his notebook with little sketches all day long. In that same way, I mean, he could choose a screen, he could choose a notebook. There's a lot of tools he could use to unpack this. And I think sometimes people like easy stories, right? They like easy stories. And I think a lot of the challenges that kids are having are more complex than just a device or the medium causing the outcome. There's a lot more to unpack there in terms of like, well, why is a kid spending 6 hours at school on a screen rather than engaged in the classroom? The other thing I would say is like, oftentimes, and this is what we're pushing back at Abundance, I'm unapologetically optimistic. I'll just say that, like that's something that you should know about me, is that a lot of these moral panics are not repeats, but they're rhymes, right? And you see this. There's a funny story from about 120 years ago about a headmaster in a boarding school in New England complaining that his young men are losing their vitality. They're sitting around in the evenings, no longer interested in doing stuff on campus. They're not finishing their homework. They're not doing it. And he's complaining about them listening to the radio, right? Listening to radio shows, right? So there's always been this issue, right? It's like, how do we keep kids engaged and doing things we think they ought to do versus the things that they would like to do? And that's a constant battle. And the latest form of that is sort of digital technology and devices in the classroom. And the last thing I think I would say to your point, Terry, about like balancing like what I do in the policy world and my life as a husband and a dad with 7 kids is I just tend to believe in people. And I think that people closest to the problems are probably the best suited to fix them if we empower them to find solutions. So I think empowering parents to make decisions about their kids in the home is really important to finding solutions that work for the kids that need them. Empowering teachers to find solutions in the classrooms that work for the students that are in their room, right? As opposed to general principles or general rules that are trying to account for tens, if not hundreds, if not millions of kids, right? Like really empowering those closest to the problem, because a challenge that a teacher might face in the classroom with devices in one classroom could be totally different than the one next door, much less the one down the hall or in a completely different building or district. And empowering parents and teachers to be more actively engaged and to experiment and to figure out what works for the kids in front of them is a really key piece, I think, of finding those emergent solutions as we do trial and error in what does and doesn't work, and empowering people to course correct as fast as possible, I think gets us to the sort of optimal solutions faster than writing big national or state policies that take years or decades to correct when we get them wrong.
And Christopher, in the pursuit of safety, that's what we want, right? We want our children to be safe. So in the pursuit of safety, and I'm just underscoring what you just said, we don't want to diminish creativity and production. Right. And so finding that balance of context, because what I live in New York State. So we, of course, have the largest school district in the United States, downstate from me. What can work in New York City is going to be much different than what can work in a small town in Idaho or Wyoming. And when you lay a statewide policy, you're not just focusing on the safety aspect, and you're getting into what is happening in the classroom that could really hinder and put students at a disadvantage, children at a disadvantage.
I'm really glad that you announced yourself as an optimist. I usually try to keep that to the end so that we don't end on a down note, but I'll take it wherever. So you mentioned all the terrible statistics, and that the technology is evolving. Do you have any sense of, can you explain to yourself why there seems to be this kind of generalized panic? Or am I reading that wrong?
Like, why do I believe there's this panic?
Yes.
I would say it's probably threefold is the way I'll put it. Okay. I think we have an entire generation of digital natives who are given access to social media who probably shouldn't have been given the level of access they were given. But those are parental decisions. Okay, so you have this, and now you have an entire generation of people where yes, we do make mistakes sometimes as parents, right? Like that is a reality. So we have that portion, I think, is sort of a major piece of this first. Second, I think the pace of change is so rapid that people are having a difficult time getting their sea legs, right? It just feels like every week something new is rolling out, that as soon as you kind of begin to understand the status quo, it's completely disrupted over and over and over again. And that is very unsettling, right? I just think for people who are trying to understand the world around them, that can be unsettling. Second, and then I think third, especially in the educational context, we've had a massive rollout of technology, hard tech and licenses into schools, without corresponding pedagogical training and deliberate integration. And so you're finding, and I've experienced this firsthand. Yeah, with some of my kids too, is right, like teachers are doing these brain breaks in the classroom, and they're just passing out the Chromebooks and letting kids surf the web. And then these kids are getting access to stuff, to things that they shouldn't be getting access to in the schools, and parents are upset and teachers are upset, and it was a misuse of the tool itself. And now people are like, well, the medium is the issue, right? Rather than something else. So I think you sort of have these three things. You have like the social media context is just bleeding over into anything that's digital. You have this change which is increasing, and you do have like uneven and I would say mixed reviews on integration of tech in the classrooms, for better or for worse, right? You have these resounding success stories, and you can find these absolute horror stories on both sides. And I think all three of that together is sort of fueling this panic about what do we do about the kids online sort of question. And then it's also bleeding into the education spaces. So much of education becomes increasingly digital, right? The testing, the monitoring, all of this becomes sort of screen-based as opposed to paper-based. So I think that there's a lot there, but that's sort of my read of the why we're in the world that we're in right now.
You have Dr. Seitz, you have a theory on the chaos?
On the chaos. So I think a couple factors here. There is fear of change. And so I'm going to come right now through the lens of educators. Let me come through the lens of educators, but back away with saying a fear of change. Things are changing so fast. Keeping up with them, I agree, is very hard, on top of testing and report cards and discipline and everything else that educators have within the classroom. And so I would say in that aspect, we really need to understand the underlying fear that might come out of accepting no technology in a school or low technology in a school, because there is that fear, and because it's overwhelming. And we as a world know that something happened in 2020 which has affected a lot of where we are today. One is we weren't prepared. So we weren't prepared, and professional development is a big thing of mine, so I do want to bring that in. We weren't as prepared as we would have liked to have been. And because of that, things maybe didn't happen the way that we would have liked in all cases. And so once schools came back in and everyone, there was no more social distancing, I did hear from a lot of school districts and teachers like, ooh, that was a lot, so I'm not going to use technology anymore. And I don't know if that was the right answer either. Another bucket where all of this might be coming into is how we grow educators in the classroom. The professional development is extremely important. And we really have to add on to just tool training. Tool training alone does not help all educators utilize that tool effectively in the classroom. Especially the educators that are a little bit more resistant to using more ed tech or using it in intentional ways. And so tool training is great. I think we do need to know the tools that we're using, but we also, as educators, need to understand why. What's the outcome that we want? Not the outcome from the tool, but the outcome from learning that we want. And does that tool fit? And even though I work in an international organization that's pedagogy and technology, I'm a huge advocate of, if the tool is going to make the learning harder, go traditional. Use paper and pencil. We still have that if the tool's not going to help enhance the learning experience. But I think really having good professional development for educators help bring them into an area of understanding that they can change and they're comfortable changing with the tech. And just to remind everybody here, as Christopher, as you were talking about the data, back in the 80s, bringing in a television in a classroom was considered disruptive. So we all have to understand the where we are right now. That was considered disruptive. That there was a lot of research that I read that said, oh, don't bring the TVs in too often because the kids they watch too much TV at home already. So these aren't new conversations. And what's sad is we're just having the same conversation, but with just a different character. And so how do we get past that so that we can start having those good conversations around change?
God, this is so good. We have a lot of questions. So the format of this webinar is so very much reflective of who I am, which is let's just talk. And to the people who were expecting a PowerPoint, I apologize. I do, however, want to play a little bit of video of something we're focused on at Connect and Protect. And you kind of, this goes to what you've mentioned, Christopher, which is the risk needs to be handled closest to the point of the threat. And so take a listen, and then we'll come back and talk more.
Putting age verification at the App Store is like checking IDs at the parking lot instead of the nightclub. But kids don't experience the operating system. They experience the app, the feed, the DMs, the recommendations, the nudges, the notifications. The App Store doesn't control algorithms, engagement-driven notifications, in-app messaging, or data monetization. Developers do. So if we want real safety, verification has to live where the risk lives, inside the platform, tied to real protections. Don't build a gate at the wrong layer. Put responsibility on the platforms, shaping kids' experiences every day.
So clearly we're against App Store age verification in specific, but I think my larger concern is kind of this policy-making regime that is in some ways driven by the panic we were talking about. Do you guys have thoughts about how we're approaching this?
Yes.
I was going to say, Christopher, why don't you start, sir?
Yeah. So I think there's sort of two pieces to the age verification. There's the age verification, and then sort of what content gets tailored for certain age groups. And then there's the age verification, which is outright access bans, right? Like Australia, which has banned social media under certain ages. There's, in my mind, again, to what I was saying earlier, is I'm a large proponent of sort of making sure not only that the decisions are made at the closest level to the problem, but like parents are going to know best what decisions they should be making for their kids. Now, two things with this. One, the same sort of energy, let's call it like intellectual rigor, should be brought to how do we bring tools and resources to parents that help them make better decisions, as opposed to replacing parental judgment or parenting in these contexts first. And then the other thing I would say is, like, we just have to recognize, like, not every parent is going to make the right decision. I am not a perfect parent, and there are things that decisions I've made that in hindsight we should have made a different decision, right? In all sorts of ways. Now, just because parents make decisions doesn't mean that. Just because some parents fail doesn't mean that all parents forfeit the right to that level of decision making. And I think oftentimes the arguments that are being made for a lot of these policies is this assumption that there's this asymmetric power, that the platforms are far more powerful than the parents are, and the parents are not in a position to make decisions, and therefore policymakers in government should, because they can wield tools that parents can't. And in that, I think it flips it all around and turns parents into agent, like they're just being acted upon as opposed to participants in shaping their digital future for their children first. And second, it removes the ability to change courses of action. As I've mentioned before, right? Like, I may make a decision about my 10-year-old in his online consumption different than my 8-year-old in his online consumption versus my 7-year-old or my 5-year-old or my 4-year-old or my 2-year-old or my, like, right? Like, you can go down the list and say they're all individually unique and decisions should be tailored to them as much as possible. That's not to say that there shouldn't be any rules at all, but we should be focusing on empowering parents and supporting parental decision-making, as opposed to just an all-out replacement, or viewing parental judgment and decision-making as a loophole. A lot of it's been framed lately that, like, parent decision-making is a loophole to rules, which sort of completely undermines, I think, the argument that is pro-family and pro-parent. But maybe those are my thoughts, top level, on sort of where this conversation is headed.
So as the parent of one and the parent of one girl, I will say that the girls are easier to handle.
Oh, you think so? I don't know. Well, maybe I'm in the trenches, Terry. I'm at 13, 14.
You are in the trenches.
Whew, yeah.
But your thoughts on on how we're approaching the public policy part of the discussion.
Yeah, and I'm also going to, if it's okay, there's a question in here, how can schools involve parents in policymaking when they're unfamiliar with the curriculum leading to the best decisions? So I'm going to try to make a connection with, my parenting, education, because I 100% believe in this question here. One, more so today than ever, parents need to be involved in what is happening in the schools as an understanding, and so that they feel comfortable. And I do believe that parents should be involved in and I'm coming from a parent, I'm speaking right now. Yes, parents should be involved in policymaking. However, because those are their their children, but then you flip to the other side in education. However, if they're not, one, understanding the curriculum, or two, in a safe space of understanding the change that's happening in technology, especially AI right now, they may immediately come from a place of fear and concern, and rightfully so. They want to protect their children. So I would say connecting the dots is how should schools involve parents? I'm going to actually stop right there before I continue on the rest of the question. We need to involve parents more. There needs to be more upskilling of parents in a very comfortable setting. I love when I see school districts who have parent nights where their children are taking over the professional development for the parents. And they're showing the parents what they're doing and producing in the classrooms and how they're using AI and how they're being a good digital citizen. Because we want to get parents to be able to come to the table with understanding of all of this change to help move our systems forward versus out of fear, preventing us from moving forward. So I would say bringing parents in and having conversations. I think, Terry, when you and I were talking at one point, I said, we really have to go back to it takes a community to raise a child again, and really think about that statement, because that is important now. Bringing them in when they don't understand the curriculum. I think, coming from a parent and as an educator, I think it could be less of making them understand the curriculum, but having parents understand that their educators, their teachers, and then their children in those classrooms are moving away from just being consumers and just sitting in front of a laptop or sitting in front of an iPad, or if it's bring your own device, and that they're producing. So communication is important too to parents. Classroom communication, letting parents know, hey, we use this program, this was the learning, and this is what your children can do now afterwards. Ask them about it. Ask them how they use the tool. Ask them how they failed forward, which is a big piece of mine, not only for children, myself as a parent, but also for educators, is failing forward and having those conversations of what went right, what went wrong, and how did you adapt to that. That is a skill that needs to be in place when we're talking about career and college ready. It's less about what the tool is and more about how can you adapt when the tool does not work or changes.
The old idea that this is not just happening to you, but you do have some agency and control over it. There is a question in the chat that I'm going to ask of you, Dr. Seitz. How do we balance empowering individuals with the reality that we are in community and the need to come to consensus on policies?
Probably a lot of what we just said too is upskilling those who are making the policy. I think it is vital for us in the education field, in the policy field, and nonprofits working with educators to advocate for this, to show what can happen and what is really happening in a lot, I'm not even going to say pockets, in a lot of areas in our schools. There are some great use of technology in curriculum. And so we need to have our voice. This was years ago. I was meeting with a group of superintendents, probably almost 20 years ago, and we were talking about social media. Surprisingly, we were still having the same conversation, but we were talking about social media. And one superintendent says, no, my school doesn't have any social media presence out there. And another came back and said, if you're not telling your story, someone else will. And is it the story you want to be told? And so I think more so than now, how do we balance that? It's having those conversations. It's bringing parents in. Parents are your friends. We are educators' friends, and we can help advocate. And it's really bringing a voice to what can happen when we have good policies versus having policies out of fear or having policies out of stress of what is happening so fast, especially around AI.
Chris, you talked a lot about parental control and kind of the vast amount of agency that parents have and should have. How do you factor the kind of community component into this? If we are, say, trying to reach some kind of societal consensus on how to approach this, does it just need to be way more limited than we're talking about right now?
No, I think, and this is something Dr. Seitz was just alluding to, is I think the more that we can, as parents, and educators. Now, I've never taught in the elementary school. I used to teach it in law school, and law students are very different than third graders. I know that, but I think to the question of like balancing sort of both the parental autonomy and decision making at home with teacher autonomy in decision making in the classroom. I think the more that parents and teachers can view themselves in partnership with one another, advancing their student and their child's well-being from the time they get up to the time they go to bed. And it should be a seamless experience for a kid. A kid shouldn't experience dramatic whiplash. Now that's going to occur, but I think the more that teachers and parents can work together to achieve these goals, because I don't think that there's anyone out there that says, gosh, I wish children were doing worse. Like that's just not the case. I think everyone is trying to make it easier for everyone, kids and adults, to do better. So viewing that more as a partnership and not as a power play between the two, I think becomes really important. And then understanding the role that technology can actually play in making that transition from school to home and home to school better and easier. I think that's a key part of this. But like in terms of setting policies, like obviously policies are going to be set. TikTok is not the same as an AI tutor. They're not. And I think right now, oftentimes what you see when it comes to technology policies being written in schools is it doesn't differentiate what's being accessed. It's only talking about the devices and the use of the devices. And so I do think like understanding and even coming to like, I view this in the same way. Like if schools want to prohibit phones in the schools, that's a school's decision to make, right? Like they should be making that decision. Now, making that decision across an entire state, or if a parent says, I don't want my kid to have a phone, these are decisions that should be made at the lowest level, and then matriculate up as it turns out that like there's challenges that can't be solved, at the lowest level. But I think the more we can view these things in partnership, and the more we can actually zero in on the issues, right, that are really that are really causing problems in the classroom, right? I don't think it's the computers themselves, it's the websites and some of the things that the kids are accessing that are causing the disruption and the problems in the classroom. And the more that parents and teachers can get on the same page on that and work together in partnership, I think the more likely you are to see some net benefit outcomes in the short run that don't require conflict, but require sort of mutual benefit and cooperation from parents to teachers and teachers to parents.
So the two questions here, I think we've kind of addressed them glancingly before, but I will ask them more directly. Any advice about a trend of some subjects and teachers not giving homework because students have been just using AI to answer the questions instead of doing the research themselves? That doesn't seem to be a tech problem to me.
That's a loaded question. Well, correct. And I think that's a loaded question, a good loaded question, and a question that should be discussed. And there's two ways that this can go. One, just talking about work in general, but homework. It was last year at our conference, I met a beautiful young lady. She was a junior in high school at the time, so she's a senior, she's graduating. And I was bringing up cheating. So there's a lot of talk about cheating. So this kind of goes into that idea or that bucket of cheating. And I said, tell me about cheating with AI. And did you have a class or an educator that allowed you to use AI, and was it considered cheating? And first, I just want to say there is research around cheating, and with the introduction of AI, cheating has not increased at all. Like it's not changed just because AI is there. But she had said it was an ELA class, and she says to me, the way the teacher told us we can use any digital tool we want that's appropriate for school use in our age, but it was a passion project. Their biggest grade was a passion project. And so the majority of what she had to present was from her point of view. And it was much harder to use AI to cheat to do that, because she'd have to feed AI her whole entire point of view, and it's just then restructuring it. And so that's one way. And so I think looking at what we're doing and the types of activities, and maybe that's a little bit from, and I'll put my educator hat on, I could see that's a little bit of an uncomfortable feeling as educators, especially because we like to hone our practice. We get very comfortable, especially if we've been in the same grade for many years, and we get comfortable with the curriculum and how to deliver it because we've seen successes in certain ways. And then you start bringing in AI and you're saying, I have to change the whole way I do homework, the whole way I do assessments, and that causes anxiety. It definitely causes anxiety.
The fear of change, as you've mentioned.
It is. And you're like, and then I'm going to spend more time doing this and less time being able to differentiate. And all of the things come in educators' minds. But one is creating homework, creating projects that AI could assist, but AI can't be the full because it comes from here for a student. That's one bucket. The second bucket is around using AI, and Christopher, you said this, it's a tool, like a pencil, like a notebook, and teaching students how to use AI with the human in the loop and being able to critique it for bias and having good prompts and using it as a support, but not the full entire way to do something, copy and paste. So again, I think it's looking at how we're designing learning. Assessments are another big piece, especially with online assessments. AI can almost, I think was it the other day, somebody said that I saw something, I think it was on TikTok, by the way. I saw something and they said that there was an 80-year-old math problem that never could be solved, and the latest generation of AI just solved it. And so you copy and paste a question into AI, it's going to answer A, B, C, or D. And so again, it's just looking at the way that we're asking students to show their understanding in a different way than what we've done in the past, because now they have access to tools that have a little bit more intelligence to be able to give them the answer without them learning. And so that's a really heavy question, but a good question that I think we all need to start talking about today. We cannot wait 10, 15, 20 years for a policy to come into play to then start talking about it.
Yeah, and I would add a couple things to this, and I think about even my own educational experience, right? My undergraduate degree was in history, American history, and I think someone may say, what good is a history degree when all of that knowledge is just on Wikipedia, or you could just Google dates? Is it just like memorizing dates and figures in history? No, like what I learned in that was as much how to think about and process information as it was about regurgitating facts about human history. And I think in a world of AI, human judgment and discernment becomes even more important as everything else flattens out. So a couple things in terms of like education in the AI world. One is there are ways to help teach and to test a student's ability, not what they learned, but how they learned it, and the ways in which that they're thinking critically about the information they're consuming. That cannot be replaced by AI, first. And second, it's going to require, I think what you'll find is like oral exams used to be a thing, and then they stopped being a thing. And I think they might start becoming a thing again because
Debate.
Yes, the more, and even if it's just having a student using technology in service of getting kids off of technology, but having a student record, here's your homework tonight. I want you to, record 20 seconds of your not a written response that you're going to submit to this article, but I want to hear 90 seconds or 2 minutes of your rebuttal of this article. And you can tell pretty quickly if a kid's reading from a script or not. right? You can start to even pick up AI writing. I think a lot of people can start to see this now. There's a real flat style to AI writing, that you can force kids and adults even to start to like reactivate parts of their brain that maybe we haven't used as, over the last 15, 20 years as we've become more reliant on digital communication. Those seem to be like things that aren't just important in the short run, but in the long run too. I mean, even teaching kids how to challenge an AI. AI is going to get stuff wrong. Helping them understand that like the information being provided by these machines are not objectively true all of the time. And how do you ferret that out, I think is an important part of this. And there is a question about the AFT statement on AI. And this is, I will make this, am I back? I think I froze for a second.
Yes, no, you're good.
Okay. There's like 10 pieces to it. And the one thing I think is like, yes, we should be exposing the kids to these technologies younger, not older. Because if they are experiencing it too late, they don't know how to live in a world in which they exist. And frankly, not having them in the classroom doesn't mean that they're not exposed to it. It just means they're not being exposed to it in a guided setting with a trusted adult who can help them understand that technology. So maybe if I can answer two questions at once on that one, it's like getting more on the human side of like testing humans as humans, but then also sort of integrating the technology in thoughtful ways in the classroom, not just running away from it or retreating from it altogether.
I love that you brought up videotape themselves or record themselves, going back to interviews, using AI to get both point of views of something. So go through AI, get the pro to it, and then the critique of it, and then as the student, synthesize that together, and where are you leaning because of the information? There's many ways, I agree with you, Christopher, there's so many ways that we can adapt and change around AI and technology, but it's just doing things differently. And that might be where some of the fear is as well.
I'm not surprised that we ended up talking about AI at the end. I have one last question, and you both know what it is. I'm gonna shorten it. This has been an unbelievably great conversation, and I love it. But let me ask you this. What are you most optimistic about when you think about everything we talked about today?
I can start. I think where I am very optimistic is the point where we have educators really stepping up into leadership aspects because they're boots on the ground in the classroom. And I don't mean leadership as in that role in the school, a leader, but their voice coming out. And it's because of those that are embracing this change. They're communicating, they're seeing the positive behind it. They're moving students from just sitting on a device to actually creating, and they're seeing the power and the conversations that are happening and the interactions between each other. So that makes me very optimistic that our education field, which is to me the most important field because every child goes through education, even if it's at home with your parents, you're an educator. We're coming to the table with some strong voices. So that's what I'm optimistic for, and I'd like to see more of that. What is working well, and the changes you're seeing and learning because the technology helps you do things that you were never able to do before.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be optimistic about. As I said, I'm very optimistic.
That doesn't mean you survived both law school and teaching law school, and you're still optimistic, huh?
Oh yeah. Oh, there's plenty to be optimistic about, and maybe my optimism is grounded both in my experience and what I observe in my own kids thus far in their educational journey. Is it took me quite some time until I really figured out in the education space what got me excited. And I think there were a lot of years in which I was written off because I was disengaged. And it took a long time for me to figure out the way in which I learned best and how to do that in a setting that worked for me. I watch my own kids, right? And I have, you know, I across my kids, I have kids who are like, you know, very average on things and then sort of fall very far on the tails on various aspects of who they are and the way that they live and in the way their brains work. And I'm really optimistic at the power of technology to help kids find each of their own individual learning styles and to begin to pursue their own paths in a way that's empowering, not disempowering. I think I look at like the access my 10 or my 8-year-old in particular have when we're doing things, and seeing even just how they consume information, in being able to quickly find if it's videos, if it's tutorials, if it's custom AI generated worksheets that we're making with our kids that allow them in the context of what they care most about to learn geometry or multiplication or division, to see that hyper personalized experience in a world in which I didn't have access to, makes me really optimistic for my kids and for other kids for that matter, that they don't have to wait until they're a sophomore in college to figure out how they learn best and in the way to engage in their own process of education. So,
well, that hour flew by. So clearly we'll have to do this again. I just want to thank you both for being part of a really, really great conversation. And it's been enlightening to say the least. And thanks again.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.